Hi. So yeah, I'm Steve, as Ben said, and my association with Greece and Greek wines goes back quite a long while. My first introduction to Greece and Greek wines was in 1978, when I went to Greece for the very first time. I was introduced to the delights of Retsina. And then the following year, I went and stayed the whole summer on Mykonos as a beach bum, where I was introduced to the likes of Domestica and these kind of wines. And at the time, I wasn't in the wine industry. I was just literally out of doing A levels. And what I noticed was that the wines were, not great. They were sort of stuck in a backwater in a way in terms of style. But I persevered and learned to love them. There were some of the big names that you'll know still. There were Butari and Cambas and Achaia Klaus and Santalis were all available then, but not much else. So I went back from my trips away and then eventually joined the wine trade and what shall I say, got an international feel on wine, traveling all over the place, working with a very fledgling Australian industry when I was at Oddbins, and the same with Chile, and expanding all of our rest of our portfolio. And I then stumbled again against over Greek wines and realized that there was something going on. So went headlong into it and imported quite a lot of wines, and most of the great wine producers that were available then to the UK for the very first time, and that was in the late 90s. So I've got a long history with Greek wines. I wouldn't classify myself as the ultimate Greek specialist. I would, if somebody wants to speak to those people, I would say the likes of Nikomanesis, Karakavitis, and also Konstantinos Lazarakis, both MWs, real authorities on the subject. So what I'm going to do is just basically go through a little bit brief history of Greek wine to begin with, to put everything into perspective, and to show that they've had a long and fairly tortuous, in some ways, ascent, if you like. I mean, Greek wine goes back to the Minoans. The Minoans were the first culture, pre-classical, around 3000 BC, and their center of influence was mainly Crete and Santorini, and there is evidence that those guys were making wine way back then. So long history. Their flirtation, if you like, or their association with wine was rather rudely interrupted by a huge eruption on Santorini in around 1620 BC, which ultimately destroyed. It wasn't it was one of the things, but ultimately led to the downfall of the Minoans. The Mycenaeans picked up the wine glass, or the kylix, if you like, and became quite into wine. And there were certainly wine merchants in Mycenaean times. That was around 1650 BC, and were trading wine all around the region. So they were working with the Egyptians. They were shipping to Cyprus. There was even shipping as far as Sicily. So a long history. Then there's a lot of other people who've mentioned wine historically. I mean, Hesiod was probably the first guy to get into the science of wine, and was mentioning in around about the 5th century BC. He was mentioning how to keep wine fresh by topping it all the time. He had to keep the heat in the wine, which the heat was seen as the power and the life of the wine, by keeping it in a cool place. So there's a long history. The Greeks probably invented the first kind of appellation system, which was around a wine called Pramnios Enos, which came from the island of Icaria. And there were very specific rules. The wine had to come in a certain type and a certain shape of amphora. It had to be sealed in the presence of authorities. They could export the wine, but no one who had wine on board their ships could actually enter the harbour to stop the adulteration of the wine. So a long, long history. The Greeks took the vine to Sicily in around 8 BC. So therefore it went from there up into the rest of Italy with a little bit of the help from the northern, from the Etruscans in the north. So that's how the vine got to Italy. And then also they took it to Marseille in around 6 BC, 6th century BC. So they've had a long involvement with wine, if you like. It sort of started to wane when the Romans invaded in around 146 BC, and they took the center of the wine trade that the Greeks had certainly enjoyed for a long time and took it back to Rome, and also areas further north, like in France. So that was a bit of a blow. Then the Byzantine era, they were still making wine, but mainly for domestic consumption. The only exceptions to that would be the Monemvasia wine, the sweet wine from Monemvasia, which was known by the British as Malmsey, was exported to all around the Byzantine Empire. That came to an end with the Ottoman Empire invading in about 1453, and from that point until 1821, Greece was under Ottoman control. Ottomans were Islamic, so the wine didn't take a big influence there, but the Turks or the Ottomans were businessmen as well, so they continued to produce wine. It was very heavily taxed. The Monemvasia wine and the wine from Santorini was exported around the world, but most of the wine was for local consumption. And also the Greeks were fairly downtrodden, and so it was just for local consumption. So after that, 1821, the independence, 1830, the setting up of the Greek state. Most of the wine that was produced, again, was for local consumption. Most of it was what was referred to as village wine, which would be made by the family for home consumption. It wasn't until after the wars, basically, and after the Second World War, that with the movement of people into the cities, that packaged wine came to the fore. And then after that, as packaged wine came into the fore, what I'm saying there is bottled wine. And as the Greeks got more affluent again, there was more of an interest in quality wines. To begin with, it was big brands who did a good job, the likes of Achaia Claus, who were famous or infamous for Domestica, that anyone used to go to Greece in the 70s, as I did, you would drink Domestica. There was also people like Boutari, which is still around, Kortakis, which is still around, Santalis. These guys were the sort of starting of the wine industry. Most of it was everyday wine, branded wine, and it wasn't until a few years later that you started the revolution of boutique wines, and that's where the likes of Katsaros and the Kokotos family began with the boutique wines. There was also probably one of the early pioneers was Averov, who was an aristocrat who was the first guy to plant Cabernet Sauvignon in Greece in '63, and his was a cult wine. And then it rapidly moved forward to people like Karas, who was in Sithonia, and he has had an impact on the modern Greek wine world. So anyway, and after that, as the Greeks traveled more, they became part of the European Union. They actually began taking wine very seriously, but it's a very recent and very young industry. To be honest, the first winemaking courses in Athens University weren't until '85, and the terminologist wasn't recognized by the Greek government until '87. So It shows you how recent modern wine in Greece is. But since then, they haven't stood still. So I'm going to taste some wine, I think, to begin with. I mean, when Ben introduced me, he said I was going to show some of my favorite wines. Well, I'm only going to show 3. I've got so many favorites, but we've got to do something. So the first one I'm going to show is Notios, which is from a good friend of mine. Well, 2 good friends of mine, actually. The winemaker is Yanni Paraskevopoulos, and the viticulturist is Leon Karatsalos. And this wine comes from the Peloponnese, which is, if you see the map, that's the Peloponnese, and it's in the area of Corinth, around that. It's south of Corinth. There's a sort of grey area that you see just on that map. That's where this wine comes from. Yanni Paraskevopoulos has had a role in what should I say, nurturing and teaching most of the modern graduates of winemaking in Greece. I mean, they set up the winery Gaia in '94. Prior to that, he worked for Boutari. I mentioned Boutari before, Big Boutari, and they were the pioneers of wine, modern wine in Santorini, and Yanni was the first modern winemaker there, really. So I had a big impact there. This isn't from Santorini. This is from their other winery, which was set up in '97, which is in Nemea. And Nemea is primarily known for red wine, but today we're going to taste some white wine from the region. So what we've got in here, in this wine, is a blend of Rhoditis, which is the second most planted grape in Greece. And it's a pink skin grape. It's often referred to as Rhoditis. The best type is, Rhoditis means pinky. And the best clone is Aleppo, which is the fox. And this is grown at altitude. And what you'll see here in most of the wines I'm talking about, you're either proximity to the sea or altitude, because Greece is a Mediterranean climate. So to counteract that, you have many things, but one of the main things is having altitude. So this is a blend, as I said, of Rhoditis, pink skin grape, which gives flavors of a little limey flavor. It's always got relatively good acidity, quite mineral in character. And it's also blended with Moscofilero, which is an aromatic grape, a little bit like a cross between a Muscat and a Gewurz, but with really high acidity, not low acidity that you get in Gewurz, which is also grown at altitude about 900 meters above sea level, and is one of the latest grapes to be picked in Greece, actually. It goes right until October to get this thing ripe. And the other grape in here is a recent addition. When this wine was first made, it didn't have any in, but it does now, and that's Acertico. But Acertico planted in this region, not Santorini. And the Acertico gives minerality and length of flavor. So to me, it's a really good introduction to Greek wine. It's got an aromatic component, which is the Moscofilero. It has this sort of limey zest, lime zest kind of element, which is the Rhoditis. And then it has this real minerality, which is the Acertico. Modern winemaking, stainless steel, 100%, a little bit of extended lees contact, not much skin contact, a little bit, but with 2 pink skin grapes, you don't want too much, otherwise you end up with a pink wine. And low temperature fermentation. I think a really good example of modern Greek winemaking. So, any questions? If not, I shall motor on. Okay.
Ben. To the next one, I think, Steve.
Pardon?
On to the next wine.
Yep, okay. Right, so next wine has got a story behind it. As I was, well, most of them have stories behind, but this one does have a good story. This is, in the introduction, I mentioned Chateau Carras. And Chateau Carras was set up in the 60s by a multimillionaire shipping magnate. And he decided to build an amazing hotel, leisure, restaurant complex in Sithonia, which is in the north, up here, basically up on the map. If you look at Thessaloniki, there's sort of three prongs coming down from Thessaloniki, and it's that first prong, and right on the end of there is Chateau Carras, which was set up in the beginning of the 60s, but mainly in the 70s. And Carras had an ambition to show that Greece could make world-class wines. So he employed a very famous enologist called Emile Pénaud, who was probably the father of modern winemaking in the world, pretty much, who was from Bordeaux University. And he also employed a professor of anthropology in Greece, and I'm just remembering his name. It's, yes, Logothetis, Professor Logothetis, and he was asked to go around the Greek vineyard and find the best examples of grapes he could find. So he started finding these grapes and planting them in an experimental vineyard as part of Carras. Within that selection was a totally unknown grape at the time called Malagousia. So he planted that. Emile Pénaud did the initial consultation. They set up a winery in the region, state of the art for that time. And then they looked for a winemaker. And the obvious choice was a very young man in those days called Vangelis Gerovassiliou, who'd studied with Emile Pénaud. He was his star pupil, and he just happened to be Greek and just happened to come from up the road in a village called Epanomi. So he became the first winemaker of Carras. And while he was there, he used to go and look at and taste the grapes in the experimental vineyard, because a lot of the other grapes in the main vineyard were things like Cabernet, Merlot, Limnio, etc., etc. And he tasted this Malagousia and thought, this is something really exceptional. I have to do something with this. And he started making the first Malagousia, which originally was a bit of barrel age on it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Carras went bust. Unfortunately, it was handed over to the banks, and it's had a long history. And it's coming back. Luckily, it's coming back, and it will be, I think, a force to be reckoned with. They've got 450 hectares of vineyard, which is a big organic holding in that area, and I think it's part of the history of Greece, and hopefully will be very much part of the future. But Vangelis set up his own winery, and with it he took this amazing grape called Malagousia, and he brought it to world attention, I think. So I think Vangelis can be sort of accredited with saving it from extinction, really. And so this is the Ktima wine, which is the estate. Ktima means estate in Greek, if you're interested, because you see it on a lot of wine bottles from Greece. And this is a blend of Malagousia and Assyrtiko. As I said, when Carras was planting, he was taking the best of everything from Greece, so he had a bit of everything that was good. And obviously, Vangelis also saw the benefits of Assyrtiko in the blend, which adds acidity. Wherever it is, it's better than adding tartaric acid. You can actually add acid by using Assyrtiko in the blend. So this is from Epanomi, which is up in this area just south of Thessaloniki. It's about half an hour's drive from Thessaloniki. It's a state-of-the-art winery. It was set up, I believe, in 86. Sorry, 81. But the first vintage was 86. Yeah. Vangelis started planting the grapes and setting up the vineyard in 81, but the first vintage was 86. So it's state-of-the-art winery. It's overlooking this bay here with Thessaloniki in the background, and over on the other side of the bay you have Mount Olympus. The vineyards slope down towards the coast. It's about 3 kilometers from the coast, so there's an ocean influence here. It helps the grapes to keep cool. And the vineyard is based on a base of marine fossils, so very calcareous soil. So you get this amazing, very, very distinct mineral salty edge to the wine, which you get in a lot of Greek wines. A lot of people, when they think of Greece, they think of it as being too hot for white wines, but actually white wine is the major production in Greece, and they make really good, crisp, fresh white wines. So this is a blend, as I say. Malagousia is a little bit muscaty, but not quite as aromatic. A little bit Viognier-like, but with better acidity. So gives really intoxicating, exotic wine. And with Assertico, it's got a lovely, crisp mineral finish. Really great seafood wine, and probably one of the best introductions to white wines from Greece that you could get. So all stainless steel, cultured yeast, low temperature fermentation. In fact, the grapes, when they come in, are put into a chiller and taken down to about 4 degrees before fermenting. Everything is very much state of the art.
Some questions coming, Steve.
Sure.
What would you say are the main differences between Assertico grown on Santorini and then Assertico on mainland Greece?
Yep, good question. The Santorini the Assertico grown on Santorini is a really old vines for a start. I mean, the root system is so old that no one knows how old it is, and the average age above is about 90 to 100 years. So very, very low yields to begin with, and it's volcanic basically. Santorini is a volcano, so the grapes and the roots are in pumice, basically pumice and volcanic ash, and it takes a long while till you get to the bedrock. Most of the bedrock in the whole of Greece is a lot of it is limestone, actually. In fact, all the Greek islands are an extension of the Pindos range, which runs through the center of Greece here. I'm just pointing on the map, but you can't see that, but I am. And the Greek islands are still this range, and it's an extension of the Alps, actually. It just works all the way down and through there. So volcanic, basically. Santorini is volcanic, so it's less aromatic because it's very hot as well, very short growing season, and you're picking in the middle of August in Santorini. Very low yields, around 18 hectolitres a hectare on an average year, sometimes down as low as 10, sometimes up to 20 something on a very good year. So very concentrated, not aromatic at all. A little bit of aroma, but it's not an aromatic grape. But very intense, very mineral, very saline. Because again, the only water that these vines on Santorini see is sea fret, basically. When you go into the rest of Greece, you still get that sort of telltale acidity. I mean, it gives you very good acidity and a very low pH, but they're slightly fruitier because it will probably be grown on limestone. So it's a fruitier, sometimes more accessible expression of Assertico. I mean, you know, the Santorini expression is very full on. It's very, very extreme. And there are some people that sort of run away from wines from Santorini screaming because it's just too full on, whereas they'd probably appreciate the mainland Assertico probably easier. It's more akin to what you know. I think.
I'd hate for anyone to run away from those wines.
Yes, likewise. I don't see it, but I have known some people who don't like them.
Strange folk. On the Gerovassiliou wine, what is the ratio in the blend?
50-50.
50-50. And there's no oak in there at all.
No oak in this one. He does a single vineyard, which is from it's all single vineyard basically. It's just one big vineyard, but there's a specific plot within the vineyard, which is his oldest vines, which he planted back in the early 80s, 81, as I say, he started planting with Malagousia, and that one is 100% Malagousia and is oak aged as well, because it's much bigger, richer, and older vines. But this is stainless steel, and it's 50-50.
Cool. Is Malagousia grown widely across Greece?
Well, not well. It's getting more and more widely planted. Yeah, it used to be a sort of unknown grape, and it's now very much known. And the acreage is going up, but it's still only probably 3% of the vineyard area of Greece is Malagousia. So it's still got a long way to go. Having said that, I mean it's fairly well spread. I mean, even Assertico, which is very well known, is probably still only around about that 3% as well, but growing very rapidly. I mean, the biggest, as I said, Roditis is number 2, and Savatiano is the most widely spread grape in Greece. But I think that accounts for something like 17% of all of the vine grown there, something like that.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Steve. I'll let you on the next one.
Okay, so I'll get rid of that. Shame, I could have drunk that quite easily. So we're going on to the last of the wines that I'm going to show today. As I say, I could have loads of desert island wines and loads of wines at Alavan. I do love the wines of Santorini, but there's just not enough space. And Santorini is getting a lot of airplay, if you like, at the moment. So what I'm showing here is that this is a Vidiano from Idaia, which Idaia is the ancient name for Crete, actually. And what I'm showing here is an example of how Greece is continuing to evolve. I mean, when I first mentioned Greece, I said that there was these big players like Klaus and Kotakis, and maybe 6 or 7 big players. There are about 1,300 wine producers in Greece now, and every day, almost every week, there's another place comes through. Also, islands that used to make wine in antiquity and then had stopped making wine again. I mean, like Tinos is making some great wines now. Patmos has got a winery on, which is great, called Patinos, or the Domain of the Apocalypse. And there are more and more of these of islands making wine again. And probably the best example of that was Crete. Never stopped making wine and produced a lot of wine, but most of it was jug for the tourists. And when I was exploring Greek wines through our bins in the late 90s and early 2000s, Crete wasn't on the map of quality wine production. The wines were not good, and it took them probably another 10 years to catch up. They were about 10 years behind. But having said that, now Crete is on a real roll because they have so many amazing indigenous varieties there. They have a load of their own. And I mean, Greece has about 300 indigenous varieties, and luckily for their future, about 90% of the grapes grown in Greece are indigenous, and only 10% of the imported grapes, which I think is great. So Crete was late to the game, if you like, but has been running very quickly since then and making some really, really interesting wines. And Crete is as far south as you can go, wherever we are there. Crete is way down there. So where are we going here? So this is a great example. That's Gerovassiliou. This is Idaia. So this is where they are. That was Gerovassiliou. There. So the key to making quality wine in Crete is one, understanding what you've got in the vineyard, and they've been doing a lot of work on that in the last few years, and within that they found Vidiano, because probably the most widely planted white grape is Villana, which is great, and don't get me wrong, it's really good, but there are some other little interesting varieties like Plito and Dafnes and, as I say here, Vidiano. And up until 2005, which wasn't that long ago, 15 years or so, there was only around about 10 hectares of Vidiano in the whole of Crete. It was almost extinct, but people recognized the quality in it and started planting it elsewhere. So one is finding the right grapes, which they've got. The other, if you look at the just below the map, there's an example of the vineyard. Again, it's this limestone, this chalky soil. And the other thing is that Crete is high. It's Mount Siluritis is a pretty high mountain.